A very good morning. This is Dr. Chitra from Bangalore, and I thank Dr. Matthew John and the team in Kerala for giving me this opportunity. And if you've read the name of the topic that we're going to discuss in the next few days, you know you're in for an interesting session. So we're going to be discussing challenges in histological diagnosis of thyroid cancer, an update for non-pathologists. I always believed as an endocrinologist that all solutions to all diagnostic dilemmas when it comes to thyroid cancers will be provided by pathologists. So this is exactly how I viewed my pathologist. So if I'm the person who's stranded on that island, the pathologist is the person who's coming in with a boat to rescue me. But after reviewing the evidence for this particular topic, my perspective might have been altered to understand that maybe the pathologists are also as equally lost in this situation and are looking at us to be their saviors. So I want you to remember this cartoon while we review the situation, that while we looking up to the pathologists to provide us solutions for diagnosis of thyroid cancer, the pathologists are also looking to us for enough data to make those diagnosis histologies. So this is the outline that we're going to be following. A brief overview and introduction to thyroid cancer, challenges specifically histological in the diagnosis of papillary cancer, challenges related to papillary and follicular cancer with two important updates which have happened in the histological area of thyroid cancer, and one curveball related to thyroid cancer which is relevant to us in our clinical practice. And I'll quickly summarize after that. So histo actually means tissue. So I'm going to restrict myself today to talking about histological diagnosis alone and not go into the details of, let us say, challenges in interpretation of fine needle aspiration cytology. That would be a whole other talk. So beginning with the overview of thyroid cancer, this audience must be very well aware that this is one of the most common endocrine malignancies. The global incidence of thyroid cancer is pitted at 6 per 1 lakh women and 1.9 per 1 lakh men, about 3 times more common in women. But it's reassuring to know that the mortality rates of thyroid cancer are overall very low, ranging between 0.3 to 0.6 per 1 lakh persons. So of late, the epidemiology, if you take a look at the secular trends of the evolution of thyroid cancer, the incidence seems to be growing, but the mortality rates overall seem to be decreasing globally, with some caution being raised about the fact that this could be a condition which is being more and more overdiagnosed and overtreated, right? So some of the pathological diagnostic changes which have happened in the last few years is to cater towards this understanding of epidemiology that we might be overdiagnosing thyroid cancer. Of the types of thyroid cancer, papillary cancer is the most common variant, accounting for 65 to 93%, followed by follicular cancer, followed by medullary cancer, and certain undifferentiated rare forms of thyroid cancer. Now, coming to the diagnosis of papillary CA, this is something that we learned way back in pathology when we were in the second year of medical school, that it's very easy to diagnose papillary CA even with cytology, but diagnosis of follicular neoplasms are difficult with cytology. And it's easy to diagnose papillary cancer on cytology because there are a few specific cytological changes which occur at the level of the cell in the papillary cancer, which is diagnostic when it happens together. So if you're going to break up the features into major and minor categories, you will see that in papillary cancer, the nucleus of the cell are very likely to be enlarged and oval in shape with a small eccentric nucleolus, and the chromatin is likely to be pale and evenly distributed in the nucleus. There are likely to be longitudinal nuclear grooves and occasionally intranuclear pseudo-inclusions, right? And these are features which could occur potentially singly in several other benign conditions like multinodular goiter or Graves' disease or Hashimoto's disease. But if it is being seen predominantly as a theme in a cluster of cells, it's very suggestive of papillary cancer. There are some other minor cytological features like presence of papillary architecture, presence of sarcoma bodies, presence of multinucleated giant cell in the vicinity of the tumor cells, which are all aiding in the diagnosis of papillary cancer. But like I said, all of these could potentially individually occur in numerous other causes, and apparently the pathologists have pitfalls at every single step of this. And I'm going to try and highlight what the potential pitfalls could actually be. So this is a slide to show you some of the features which I spoke about, which are characteristic of the nuclear changes of papillary cancer. You can see here in the panel towards your left that the nucleus is occupying much of the cell. You see that the chromatin is pale and spread out. And you can also see in panel B here, that in the panel to your right, that you can see nucleolar inclusions and also grooving in the black arrow. So these are all changes which are specific for papillary cancer. Now, if you see this slide, towards the left, you have a histological slide of Graves' disease, and towards the right, you have that of papillary cancer. And we just spoke about how papillae are features which are unique to papillary cancer. So what you can see here in the slide, which is showing Graves' disease as well, that there are short papillae present. Papillae are tongue-like projections. Usually they have a fibrovascular core inside. So papillae are not uncommon in other conditions. Here, as you can see, the papillae in the Graves' disease slide are much shorter. They seem to be centripetal growth, meaning they grow towards the follicle, towards the center. And it's a finding which is likely to be diffuse, especially in a condition like Graves' disease. And if you see, the nuclei are very nicely arranged. There are no inclusions in the nuclei. If you see the cytoplasm to nucleus ratio, there is a good amount of cytoplasm which is visible in the cells which are lining the follicles. These are all features which are recognized as a bland nuclei, meaning benign nuclear features. Whereas if you see in the papillary cancer, the papillae are present, they are longer, there's more haphazard growth, and they're likely to not be a diffuse finding present throughout the thyroid gland. And the characteristic nuclear changes are actually glaring at you. You can see that there are nuclear inclusions which are being present. You can see that the nucleus is covering most of the cells. So although finding papillae is a feature which is suggestive of papillary cancer, it's important to remember that this feature, which is referred to as benign papillary hyperplasia, could also be found in other benign conditions like Graves' disease or nodular goiter for that matter. Moving on to the one of the other important cytological features, which is not a major cytological feature, but a minor feature, which is described as part of papillary CA, is what is called as sarcoma bodies. And if you see in the panel towards the right, you see that the sarcoma body is present in the interstitium, and usually there's an accompanying blood vessels. A sarcoma body is actually a calcified tomb of a necrotic papillae. So that's how you're likely to identify a sarcoma body. But very often in histological slides, it's easy to find a mimicker of the sarcoma body, what is referred to as the pseudosarcoma body, which is nothing but a foci where colloid gets inspissated in the center of a follicle. Some of the keys how to differentiate between a pseudosarcoma body and a sarcoma body will be that a pseudosarcoma body is likely to be found at the center of a follicle. And if you look around the center of the follicle, which is the pseudosarcoma body, you will find various other lesions in the periphery in varying stages of formation, which means the colloid is getting trapped, inspissated there, and many other more pseudosarcoma bodies are being formed. So this is also one of the pitfalls that they'll need to watch out for. And I've been talking so much about the nuclear changes and about how the nuclear changes are one of the clinching factors for diagnosis of papillary CA. Here you see in this slide that the nuclei of varying sizes, and the black arrow is pointing to one of the larger cells with a nuclei which is large. You also see some chromatin clearing, and there's an intranuclear inclusion in the arrow in the cell which is pointed out by the arrow. All features which are suggestive of changes which could occur in papillary CA. But you zoom out into a low power mode, and if you take a look, you see that the entire thyroid gland seems to be involved with an intense inflammation of lymphocytic cells. And all of these changes are usually, the nuclear changes are seen throughout, interspersed in this gland, right? These changes are referred to as reactive nuclear changes. And in this slide, you appreciate that the predominant histopathology is Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and the nuclear changes are secondary to the insult to the cells, secondary to the intense lymphocytic infiltration. So these are referred to as reactive nuclear changes. So one simple clue, if you provide to your pathologist while you're submitting the gland for a histopath examination, letting them know that there is a past history of Hashimoto's thyroiditis, would make the job much, much easier for your pathologist to decipher these reactive nuclear changes from the actual changes which occur in papillary CA. So this is a reactive nuclear change. And this is another instant of a reactive nuclear change. The histopathology slides just changed. If you see in the panel towards your left, you do see all of the nuclear changes that we spoke about. There is a clearing in the nucleus. There is intranuclear inclusions. But when you again zoom out into high power mode, you see well-formed follicles with colloid, something which is part of normal thyroid histology. And you notice that there are certain areas of scarring, and these nuclear changes are seen only in the areas where the scarring is present, suggesting that this is overall a benign adenomatoid nodule with changes in the nucleus only in areas where there is some amount of insult or scarring. So this is also an important thing to be kept in mind, that the nuclear changes could also occur in other conditions. Next, we come to another important topic, which is frozen section. A frozen section is very often used by surgeons and also asked for by endocrinologists to decide the extent of surgery, to decide if there is a need for cervical neck dissection. And I always believe that the frozen section was the magic phone call that you make to your friend to find out what the answer is. But apparently, frozen section itself comes with its whole baggage of adjustments that you need to make to interpret. So here in this slide, you see the panel towards your left is a section from a frozen section, and on the right is the permanent section. You see here that both of them are from the same gland actually. But if you see in the frozen section, that there seem to be changes in the nuclei. The nuclei seem to be enlarged. There seems to be some clearing inside the nucleus. All of it is sending out signals of papillary CA. But overall, the architecture seems to be preserved. The follicles seem to be well preserved. There seems to be colloid at the center, all of which are features suggestive of benignity. So it's a very confusing picture which is being sent. And in the same gland, when you do a permanent section, you see that the cells are looking absolutely normal. The nuclei are normal, and there are no nuclear inclusions or grooves, right? Suggesting that the nuclei are bland. So this is what is referred to as a frozen section artifact. The process of making a frozen section itself causes some changes in the nuclei. It makes the nuclei larger and paler, and even normal cells can look very much like the papillary thyroid cells. And in fact, the thumb rule amongst pathologists happens to be in frozen sections to disregard almost all the nuclear changes which is visible, and instead base the diagnosis mainly on architectural features, like is there invasive growth, is there papillary formation, is the follicle being maintained, are there psammoma bodies, is there capsular invasion, vascular invasion, and not at all about the cells. And this is something which I didn't know at all about and which I learned now. And I'm going to be more, let's say, critical and discerning about when I ask my frozen section and how I interpret that. Now, moving on to pitfalls encountered while you're interpreting invasion of tumors. There are three major levels of invasion that you should be focusing on. One is the capsule, which contains the mass or the thyroid for that matter, whether there is vascular invasion, and whether there is extrathyroidal extension. So apparently even determining this is rift with pitfalls. And I'm going to pause at the important ones so that we get an idea as to how not easy it is to interpret this. So in this slide, I'm trying to demonstrate capsular invasion. towards the left, you see a gross photograph of the thyroid gland and with a growth at the bottom, which is seen. And on the right, you see a histological section, and you see that there is a pale pink capsule on either side, and there is like a stream in the middle, which balloons out into a mushroom, right? And this is what is referred to as capsular infusion. The pale pink collagenous matter is the capsule, which is breached, and the mushroom like growth is found beyond that. This is classic of capsular invasion. Now let me show you another slide here. Here also you see that the capsule is positioned at about 6 o'clock, 12 o'clock position, and you see that there seems to be cells present on either side, almost looking like capsular invasion. But guess what this actually is? This is what is referred to as VHA TTF. No, I did not make that up. The pathologist made that up, which stands for worrisome histological alterations following fine needle aspiration of the thyroid. So what you're seeing actually is the track followed by the needle while the FNA was done. And if the pathologist is not informed of this, or if they are not alerted to this, it can very easily look like the capsular invasion to the untrained eye. There are certain clues here. The clues are that there seems to be hemorrhage in the track where the needle went in. There seems to be some scarring. There seems to be breach of some blood vessels, and there seems to be hemosiderin deposits, which indicates that an FNA was done a few days ago. And this is not really capsular invasion. So one easy way to make this job easy for the pathologist is to just let them know the FNA was done on this day from this nodule is something. So when they are sectioning that particular nodule, they'll have that information to watch out for and not misdiagnose a capsular invasion. Moving on to, we spoke about extrathyroidal extension. Now, the thyroid gland is separated by numerous structures around it. And in this slide that is visible here, you by now will be able to recognize the thyroid follicles filled with colloid of varying sizes being present there. And what you'll also see is that there is muscle around or in between the thyroid gland, right? So to the untrained eye, it could look like this is extrathyroidal extension, that the thyroid has managed to invade the muscle. But a quick understanding or a recap of the anatomy of the thyroid gland should show that at least at the level of the isthmus, the thyroid gland is very close to the muscles of the neck. In fact, it's very common for thyroid gland and muscles and even fat tissue from the surrounding area to be coexisting in the same plane, especially at the level of the isthmus. And another thing is that the thyroid capsule is not a solid, robust capsule. It's a very incomplete, irregular capsule. In some situations, it might be very thin. In some situations, it could be well formed, especially around the edges. It's very likely that the capsule might not exist at all, sometimes confusing the pathologist to think that there is extrathyroidal extension. Now, this has been a point of contention amongst the pathologists as well for a very, very long time. And we all know that extrathyroidal extension is an important aspect of the histological diagnosis, which is going to help us grade the tumor as, let's say, high risk or intermediate risk. And that's how we manage or design the treatment protocol to reduce the risk of recurrence. So we've all known that extrathyroidal extension is an adverse prognostic matter with increased risk of recurrence and mortality. There are two categories of extrathyroidal extension which were traditionally being recognized as. One is minimal or microscopic extrathyroidal extension, in which the invasion is detected solely at the level of the microscope. So if you examine the gross sample, you're not able to predict or tell whether there is invasion of the surrounding tissues. Gross extrathyroidal extension is one where it is direct. You are able to see it while dissecting itself, that the thyroid C has extended into the surrounding tissue, either the strap muscles or the subcutaneous tissue, or the viscera like the trachea and the larynx, or the recurrent laryngeal nerve. Now, this is data from follow-up of patients with extrathyroidal extension. They followed them up in 3 groups: people who had no extrathyroidal extension, people who had microscopic extrathyroidal extension, and people who had gross extrathyroidal extension. And when they followed them up for recurrence-free survival, they noticed that people who had micro extension extrathyroidally did just as well as people who had no extrathyroidal extension. And whereas the only thing which mattered in terms of recurrence happened to be gross extrathyroidal extension. So with that bit of information, there was a recent update in the AJCC staging or classification of thyroid cancer, which stands for American Joint Committee of Cancer, where microscopic extrathyroidal extension has been removed from the staging process of differentiated thyroid cancer itself. Gross has been broken down into two sections. If the gross invasions involve only the muscles, any size of the tumor, it would come under T3B. If the gross extension is into the subcutaneous tissue, larynx, trachea, esophagus, that would be T4A. So this is a recent update which has occurred in the moving up of the classification of the stages of the thyroid cancer. Now, I'm going to pause to talk about this variant of papillary cancer. Now, papillary cancer's most common type is the classical form, followed by the follicular variant of papillary cancer. So in the follicular variant of papillary cancer, the nuclei are all showing changes which are characteristic of papillary CA, but the architecture is predominantly of ill-formed follicles, right? Now this is referred to as follicular variant of papillary cancer. This follicular variant of papillary cancer is further divided into two groups: encapsulated and non-encapsulated or invasive form of follicular variant of papillary CA. Now, since all of this was formed as a part of papillary CA, the surgeries were extensive, the follow-up was rigorous, and fear about risk of recurrence was also very, very high. But in the last few years, there has been good news for this category of follicular variant of papillary CA, where it is completely encapsulated, that survival seems to be good, that the course seems to be indolent and benign. So this is a slide which is showing you the follow-up of around 94 patients who had encapsulated follicular variant of papillary thyroid cancer, who received three forms of surgery. One was lobectomy, one was thyroidectomy, and the other was thyroidectomy and lymph node dissection, or surgery with radioablation. And they were followed up for a good decade or so. And what was interesting to note was, irrespective of the tumor size, irrespective of the tumor stage, at the end of 10 years or more of follow-up, there was no lymph node metastasis, there was no increased risk of recurrence, there was no distant metastasis. So what essentially shows that it seems to be following a benign course, not the malignant or the scarier course of the papillary cancer variant, which is the reason why about 2 to 3 years ago, the WHO, when it redid the classification of tumors for endocrine organs, it renamed this, which was called as the encapsulated follicular variant of papillary CA, and moved it and renamed it as non-invasive follicular thyroid neoplasm with papillary-like nuclear features. So for all practical purposes, it's following the span of or following the course of a follicular adenoma. A follicular adenoma has an indolent course. It has a very low risk of recurrence. The only difference here is that the nuclei or the cells are showing features which are suggestive of papillary cancer. So this is a term which has been introduced now to replace the encapsulated follicular variant of papillary CA. And the message which probably the non-pathologists like us should take back is that this has a better prognosis and the surgery need not be extensive. And as I've shown you previously, even a lobectomy works just as well in providing recurrence-free survival for your patients. So this is a graph which is trying to kind of place this new entity in the context of papillary CA and follicular CA. I'm going to try and explain how this table works. On your left panel, we are talking about nuclear features which are like papillary thyroid CA. And on the above panel, we are talking about capsular and vascular invasion. Now, if you have changes which are nuclear changes like PTC, and if you have capsular or vascular invasion, you have follicular variant of PTC, right? If you have only capsular and vascular invasion, but you do not have the nuclear changes of PTC, you have follicular cancer. If you do not have any, moving to the last column here, if you do not have any capsular or vascular invasion, and you have no changes suggestive of papillary C in the nuclei, you have a follicular adenoma. Now, if you take this nuclear adenoma, and in that section, if the cells are showing changes suggestive of papillary CA in the nuclei, then you have what is called as non-invasive follicular thyroid neoplasm with papillary-like nuclear features. So you see that it is moved towards the benign part of the window, which means that surgery need not be as extensive, and also follow-up could potentially be relaxed. After this reclassification, there have been numerous papers which have been published reiterating this notion that it could be an indolent tumor. So we are likely to see changes in the follow-up plans for this subclassification of thyroid cancer. Amongst the other challenges we face, I think this is a rare situation where you, on cytology, you had a positive diagnosis of papillary thyroid cancer, but at the end of the histological diagnosis, you end up with a negative diagnosis. Now, could this happen? Is this because your cytology was a false positive? You probably read some reactive nuclear changes as papillary changes and made a diagnosis of papillary cancer, or did the tumor disappear, or was the tumor so small that you could not pick that up? All of those could be potential explanations. But when I was speaking to pathologists trying to understand this topic much better, I learned something else. How many sections of the thyroid gland or the nodule do you submit for histological evaluation or examination after a surgery, right? So I had presumed that the entire gland would get sectioned and the entire gland would get studied throughout, because that's what I tell my patients, is if we do an FNA, we only get a section of the cells and we study only those. If we do a surgical biopsy or a thyroidectomy, you get an opportunity to study the entire gland and see if there are any foci suggestive of malignancy. But apparently, sectioning the entire thyroid nodule is not the routine in all situations. And this is the rough guide which is followed by pathologists. So if there is one single dominant nodule, the sections are likely to be taken from that dominant nodule, which the corollary of that is likely to mean that the other parts of the thyroid gland might not be sectioned as much in detail. And if you have a much smaller nodule, the rest of the gland is likely to get sectioned a little bit more to make sure that you include the capsule and the isthmus and all of that. For conditions where there is diffuse involvement, like let's say Graves' disease, we are likely to take a section from all the three lobes and study them. So there was a learning point in this for me, and I'm hoping that it will be of use to some of us here at least, that when you get a thyroidectomy sample done, if you are not letting the pathologist know exactly what you're thinking of, then they might not be able to provide the answer. So if you're thinking of a suspicious nodule in an individual who has a multinodular goiter or a Graves' disease, you need to communicate to the pathologist, and then they will do what is called as a full embedding of the thyroid, which means they'll section almost literally everything of the thyroid and then subject that to a study. And but if this bit of crucial information is not sent out to them, then we are likely to reach the situation where we might miss certain malignancies, or we might have positive lymph nodes and we might not pick up the foci of malignancy in the thyroid gland itself. Now, we spend the next 2 minutes discussing a curveball situation, which might not fit the topic completely, but I thought it was interesting because it's relevant to the diagnosis of thyroid cancer. So this is a case presentation. There's a 22-year-old woman who has been followed up and being treated for Hashimoto's thyroiditis from the age of 13 years of age. She does not have a family history of thyroid cancer. At the age of 13, she presented with these complaints, and then ultrasound of the neck at that point revealed diffusely enlarged thyroid nodules bilaterally, which was compatible with thyroiditis. 3 years later, another ultrasound was done, which again showed diffuse low parenchymal echogenicity. Now, 6 years after the last ultrasound, she's presented with a palpable lesion in her neck. Okay, so I'm going to just take you through the panels. Panel A was the first ultrasound which was made at the age of 13 years. You see that there is some increased signal with some increased vascularity. A diagnosis of thyroiditis was made. Another ultrasound was done 3 years after the baseline ultrasound, which showed some more heterogeneity in the signal, but nothing extra was seen. And now in the panel D is the latest ultrasound, which is showing diffuse microcalcifications spread throughout the gland, right? And here you see in the histopathology slides that there are psammoma bodies which are present. The white arrows in both panel F and panel G are psammoma bodies, and the black arrows are pointing to tumor aggregates of cells which are showing nuclear features suggestive of papillary cancer. I have not been able to zoom into this to show you that. And the diagnosis histologically of this clinical presentation and the histological diagnosis was that of diffuse sclerosing variant of papillary cancer, which presented as innumerable microcalcifications in a patient who was an adolescent who presented with Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Now, this variant of papillary thyroid cancer is a biologically aggressive variant, tends to occur at a younger age group. Most of the case reports or series have included individuals who are young adolescents or young adults. There seems to be a higher incidence of cervical lymph node metastasis. The ultrasound feature seems to be diffuse scattered microcalcification, and in most times there is no visible mass or nodule. Even if there is, the nodule size is less than 1 centimeter. And FNAC shows numerous psammoma bodies or microcalcifications, and the tumor cells are usually dispersed. So it could mean that the FNA might not pick up the tumor cells at all. And the lesion seems to permeate the entire gland, and it could present as a diffuse thyroid enlargement without a dominant nodule. And histological analysis usually shows copious inflammation, and the tumor cells are usually seen in microscopic islands. So I thought this was interesting because Hashimoto's thyroiditis is very common, and considering this was a biological aggressive variant occurring in younger individuals, that we should spend a moment to take this in. So quickly moving on to summary, I think it's only fair that pathologists have all access to all the information which is available to clinicians, so that we work as a team to make a good histological diagnosis. So if you're writing out the summary which you send out with the slide, and I know that we've not written this for a while and the residents are filling it out, and I now completely understand why pathologists call from the lab and get so disturbed when we give incomplete information. So a good write-up when you're sending out a histopath for a post-thyroidectomy sample should include details of the age, whether there's a family history, whether there's a history of a preceding thyroid pathology, whether the swelling presented acutely, subacutely, if there was an FNA done, which nodule was FNA'd, what the ultrasound report showed, all the FNAs which were done, preferably with the slides included. And also to maybe suggest whether you're thinking of a malignancy, whether it's enough to just histologically study the nodule in question, or do you want the entire gland to be sectioned? So if the conversation is fuller from your end, you're likely to get better responses from the pathologist. And going over some of the common pitfalls encountered by pathologists, papillary thyroid cancer is the most common form, has some new characteristic nuclear findings which should make diagnosis easy. But as you can see from this table, that literally every characteristic feature has a pitfall in the form of a mimicker which could potentially be benign. We reviewed papillary architecture being seen even in normal benign conditions like benign papillary hyperplasia seen in Graves' disease. Psammoma bodies which are characteristic of papillary CA, there could be mimicked by pseudopsammoma bodies seen in benign conditions. Reactive nuclear changes seen in some inflammatory conditions like Hashimoto's thyroiditis could potentially mimic as the nuclear changes seen in papillary CA. And FNAC track could potentially be an artifact for capsular invasion. We've also spoken about how frozen sections could potentially change the nuclei of the cells, and asking when you're asking for a frozen section is also an important thing. Extrathyroidal invasion, microscopic extrathyroidal invasion has been removed in the staging of differentiated thyroid cancer, and only gross extrathyroidal extension is included in the staging. Probably the most important change in the histological scenario of thyroid cancer is the reclassification of encapsulated follicular variant of papillary thyroid cancer to this new entity, which is non-invasive follicular thyroid neoplasm with papillary nuclear features, which has reassuringly a more indolent course, probably needing less extensive surgery and less intense follow-ups. There's also a situation where you could potentially have a positive FNAC and a negative HPE, very, very rare occurrence. But one way to avoid that is to understand or let your pathologist know what you're thinking of. So the examination could be more complete. And diffuse sclerosing variant of papillary thyroid cancer in Hashimoto's thyroiditis is one of the new and rarer forms of papillary cancer, which is being reported more frequently. The unique features of this variant is that it tends to occur in younger individuals, has an aggressive course. Presentation might not be in the form of a nodule, but it could be in the form of a diffuse enlargement. And ultrasound is likely to pick up diffuse microcalcifications, and FNAC is usually likely to show scatters of psammoma bodies with scatters of tumor aggregates. So this is something to be kept in mind, because we are not very likely to think of thyroid cancer in situations outside of a thyroid nodule-like presentation. So I'm hoping I've done justice and brought up to you the challenges which are faced by the pathologist during the histological diagnosis. And I'm hoping that you've taken a couple of points which is likely to make clinical practice better for you. And I'm open for questions. Thank you.